What's up, guys? Nuance Bro checking in, and today we're going to be talking about how Google is potentially discriminating against some of its workers, but it might not be who you think it is. Now, according to this New York Times piece, you can see Google finds it's underpaying many men as it addresses wage equity. And as we scroll down, we can see when Google conducted a study recently to determine whether the company was underpaying women and members of minority groups, it found, to the surprise of just about everyone, that men were paid less money than women for doing similar work. The study, which disproportionately led to pay raises for thousands of men, is done every year, but the latest findings arrived as Google and other companies in Silicon Valley face increasing pressure to deal with gender issues in the workplace, from sexual harassment to wage discrimination. Now, funny enough, this finding is actually kind of convenient for Google because, as you can see here in this article, they bring up how they're being sued by women for being underpaid. Gender inequality is a radioactive topic at Google. The Labor Department is investigating whether the company systematically underpays women. It has been sued by former employees who claim they were paid less than men with the same qualifications. And last fall, thousands of Google employees protested the way the company handles sexual harassment claims against top executives. Now, in reporting for this story, I decided to look at Google's annual diversity report, and I found actually a lot more interesting things than what I originally thought that this video was going to be about. So let's take a look at the report. Now, if we scroll down in the report, we get to overall representation for the year 2018, and when it comes to gender, we have about 31% female and 69% male. Now, one thing I noticed in the report is that they were bragging about how they've been increasing the amount of women represented in the company. Now, Google is a very tech-oriented business. I mean, it's a search engine company. So a lot of the hires are going to be sort of computer science techie people. So for the purposes of my analysis, I decided to look at computer science degrees when it came to males versus females. And what I found is quite fascinating. According to information from the US Department of Education, when we look at this graph, we can see that the female share of bachelor's degrees in computer science went from 28% in 1993 to about 18% in 2016. So if we're talking about pure equality here, we should have seen the numbers at Google go from 28% women to about 18% women. Now, unfortunately, we don't have data that goes all the way back to 1993 for Google. They only kept data until they only started collecting data on these sort of things, I think about in 2014 or so. So we only have numbers that go to that date. But regardless, they're bragging about how they're increasing the amount of women in the company, and we see the numbers increasing. But they're significantly above the 18% of computer science bachelor degree holders that we see here. Now, I'm sure many of you are going to say that overall representation in the company doesn't necessarily have to do with computer science degrees because Google's a big company. You know, they could be chefs in the company or janitors or managerial positions. Not all the positions have to do with tech or computer science. And that's a fair criticism. So we can go down to the portion of the study where they talk about 2017 hires in tech, and we can get a more specific number. And when we do that, we can see the number falls for women. It goes down to 24.5% for females versus 75.5% for males. Now you can see that 24.5% is still significantly higher than the 18% we saw for bachelor's degrees in computer science. But here's where the interesting part comes in, because none of this was really talked in any of the articles that I read. And this is just kind of something I naturally stumbled upon myself upon reading the study. Google gets a lot of flack in these articles for how few women they hire. But it seems like a lot of people don't go into the details about the racial composition of the people they hire and the representation of those groups. So here's the interesting thing that I noticed. As they're bragging about increasing the number of women in the company, despite numbers of women's computer science degrees going down from 28% in 1993 to 18% in 2016, when it comes to blacks and Hispanics in the company, we see a totally different trend. So going back to 2017 hires, as you saw, the 24.5% for female versus 75.5% for male. But if we look on the right, we can see that only 2% of the hires were black and 3.2% of the hires were Latino. Now, why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting for a couple of reasons. When we go to that graph I was talking about earlier, you saw that the share of female bachelor's degrees in computer science had gone extremely down from 28% to 18%. we can see the exact opposite trend taking place with Blacks and Latinos. So if we look at these graphs from the Center of Education Statistics, we can see in 1991 to 1992, Blacks were 13% of the population, yet they were 6% of computer science majors. And for Hispanics, they were 10% of the population, but 4% of computer science majors. But when we move to 2015, 2016, we can see they're still 13% of the population for Blacks, but they're now 10% of computer science majors. So they almost doubled their numbers. And for Hispanics, you can see they increased their population to 18%, and they're now 12% of computer science majors, increasing that number by 3 times. So in the same time period when women's share of bachelor's degrees in computer science were going down, the share of Black and Hispanic computer science majors continued to go up. But what do we see in the numbers? Well, we see that women are actually overrepresented as far as, the percentage of computer science degrees that they have when it comes to being in the tech sector in Google, but Blacks and Hispanics are significantly underrepresented. Women are 18% of computer science majors, but they're 24.5% of tech hires at Google. Blacks are 10% of computer science majors, but they're only 2% of new tech hires at Google. But take a look at this number. Of 2017 tech hires, 47.1% were Asian. That's despite Asians making up only 7% of all computer science majors. In fact, whites at Google are only 42.2% of 2017 tech hires, yet they make up 62% of all computer science majors. So simply based on representation, it looks like Google is discriminating against everyone except for Asians and women. Now look, does this necessarily mean that Google is racist? Well, no. Certain groups just might do better at certain jobs than others. And there can be many reasons for this. Culture, the school one went to, level of education. But I want to point to another detail in the study: attrition rates. So here you can see attrition by gender and race, and that basically means how many people they're able to keep versus those who leave. So it kind of takes into account turnover. And what we see is this: women are significantly less likely to leave than men. And when it comes to race, Blacks are the most likely to leave the company, and Asians are the least likely to leave the company. Now, once again, there can be various reasons for why this is the case with attrition. Maybe an environment is not super welcoming. Maybe that group just didn't do well at the job or whatever. There's various reasons to explain why this is the case. But if year after year, one group leaves less than another, you can expect to see more of that group that didn't leave at the company and less of the group that did leave the company. Now, when it comes to these reports, I think they're generally kind of useless. Companies shouldn't be hiring on the basis of race or gender or any other sort of immutable characteristic. They should be hiring the people who are best for the job. And if the people who are best for the job have the best resumes, have the best performance, tend to be more of one race or gender or other characteristic for whatever reason, then that's just where the chips fall. Do the chips fall that way because of discrimination? It's possible, and it's definitely been the case in the past. But in the case of a lot of these tech companies, at least earlier on, before they were, inspired to enforce these affirmative action quotas or whatever the heck they do so they don't get sued in court, they just hire the people who are best for the job. If someone makes them more money, they don't care if the person's white or black. The only color they care about is green. But in the end, it doesn't really matter anyway, because Google still gets sued by women who feel they're underpaid, even though the report shows that they're overpaying women and underpaying men. I mean, it's all just ridiculous. I mean, they're going to get sued anyway. None of it matters. But anyways, guys, I just thought this report was interesting. I thought the headlines from the New York Times and all those groups were just fascinating, that they did this report basically to kind of show and correct for how low they're paying women, but they found out they were actually overpaying women compared to men, so they had to give the men raises. And they're still getting sued by the women for being underpaid. But then when you look at the data, they're actually hiring more women than the percentage of computer science degrees, but they're actually hiring way less Blacks and Latinos. It's just a mess. Google's just driving themselves into the ground with this sort of social justice-y ideology. They should just stick to hiring the best person for the job. Just my opinion, but what are you going to do? Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Social media links are in the description box below. as well as merch. And I'll see you next time, bro.